The glamour, the dazzling smiles, the flawless faces. Golden Age Hollywood sold perfection as if it were real. But what if I told you those legendary looks were carefully crafted, sometimes painfully, sometimes secretly, under the surgeon's knife? Behind the closed doors of Beverly Hills clinics, recovery rooms, hidden in mansions, and scars airbrushed by studio photographers, some of Hollywood's biggest stars were remade for the screen. These weren't just minor fixes. They were transformations so dramatic that they created icons out of ordinary men and women. The public saw gods and goddesses. What they didn't see were stitches, bruises, and the pain of surgeries that studios worked overtime to bury. Today we're counting down 15 secret surgeries that transformed Golden Age stars forever. And 3? It's so shocking you'll never look at Hollywood's Golden Age the same way again. So let's begin. 15. Audrey Hepburn, the natural beauty who wasn't entirely natural. Audrey Hepburn is remembered as the embodiment of effortless grace. Roman Holiday, Breakfast at Tiffany's. Her delicate features, wide eyes, and radiant smile defined an era. To the world, she seemed untouched, the rare star who didn't need Hollywood's tricks. But even Audrey had help. Before her breakthrough, Paramount executives worried that Hepburn's slightly crooked teeth might undermine her otherwise flawless appearance. So in the early 1950s, studio dentists quietly went to work. Using subtle reshaping and early veneers, they crafted the smile that would become part of her timeless elegance. It wasn't drastic, but it was deliberate. Hepburn herself hesitated at first, reportedly fearing the changes would rob her of her natural charm, but the studio insisted. A perfect smile was an investment, and for Audrey, it paid off. Within months of her procedures, she landed Roman Holiday, a performance that earned her an Oscar and turned her into an international icon. The irony, Hepburn became the poster child of natural beauty while wearing a carefully constructed smile. Unlike some stars, her surgery was minor, almost invisible, but it shows just how ruthless Hollywood was in pursuing perfection. Even the most graceful face of the Golden Age wasn't entirely 14. James Dean, the rebel's manufactured smile. James Dean, the eternal symbol of rebellion, gave us only 3 films before his tragic death, yet his image still burns brighter than most stars who lived decades longer. His smirk, half defiance, half vulnerability, became part of his legend. But here's the secret: that iconic smile wasn't entirely his. When Warner Brothers signed Dean in the early 1950s, they were investing in a brand, not just a boy from Indiana. And Dean's natural teeth didn't fit the brand. They were uneven, slightly discolored, and not the kind of smile you plaster on posters. So the studio ordered dental veneers, a then cutting-edge procedure. Dean hated the process. It was slow, painful, and made him feel fake. According to dental technicians, he constantly asked, "Will this make me look too Hollywood?" Ironically, the outsider who embodied authenticity had an artificially perfected smile. But here's the twist: those veneers didn't just change his look, they changed him. With a smile he finally felt confident showing, Dean carried himself differently. His brooding stare had more fire behind it. His screen test for East of Eden, done shortly after his dental work, was the one that convinced executives he could carry a film. James Dean's rebellion may have been authentic, but the smile that made him immortal, that was Hollywood engineering. 13. Gloria Swanson, the pioneer of the knife. Before Marilyn Monroe, before Elizabeth Taylor, there was Gloria Swanson, the queen of silent film who defined glamour in the night. But when talkies arrived, Swanson faced a terrifying reality. Younger actresses were taking over, and Hollywood had no mercy for aging women. So she did something revolutionary, something almost unthinkable at the time. She went under the knife. In 1928, Swanson traveled to Paris, where surgeons who had developed techniques treating World War I veterans experimented with her face. She received one of the earliest known Hollywood facelifts. Primitive, painful, and dangerous, it required weeks of recovery. Publicly, she claimed to be vacationing. In reality, she was swollen and stitched. The gamble worked. Swanson returned to the screen looking refreshed, sharper, more angular, Audiences saw timeless beauty. No one suspected the scalp. She went on to inspire an entire generation of actresses who realized surgery could mean survival. And when she re-emerged in Sunset Boulevard decades later, playing a faded star who couldn't let go of youth, the role carried a chilling truth. Gloria Swanson had lived that battle and cut herself open to win it. 12. Kirk Douglas, the Chan that built a career. Kirk Douglas's rugged jawline is one of the most recognizable profiles in Hollywood history. That deep cleft chin became his calling card, as iconic as his fiery performances in Spartacus and Champion. But here's what audiences never knew. Hollywood gave him that chin. Early in his career, Douglas was a promising stage actor with sharp features, but nothing that screamed leading man. Studio executives decided to emphasize what little chin definition he had. Around 1946, he underwent a subtle augmentation procedure, inserting a small implant to deepen the cleft and harden the jawline. It was risky. At the time, chin implants were experimental and often failed, but for Douglas, it worked beautifully. The implant reshaped his face just enough to give him a distinct, masculine edge. Overnight, he went from handsome to unforgettable. And it didn't just change how he looked, it changed his entire career trajectory. The chin made him stand out in a sea of handsome men. It photographed power, determination, danger. And in Hollywood, looks weren't just decoration, they were destiny. So yes, Douglas was born with talent. But that legendary chin, that was Hollywood design. 11. Betty Grable, $1 million legs at any cost. If Marilyn Monroe was the face of desire, Betty Grable was the legs. During World War II, her pin-up poster of a playful pose in a white swimsuit sold more than 5 million copies, becoming the most requested image by American soldiers overseas. Her legs were so famous, they were insured by Lloyd's of London for $1 million, a publicity stunt that cemented their legendary status. But what fans never knew was how much work went into those legs. Grable underwent painful procedures to maintain their perfect contour. Early versions of liposuction, skin tightening treatments, and even injections designed to reduce fluid retention were part of her routine. This was decades before such techniques were safe or standardized, and the procedures often left her bruised, swollen, and in pain. Fox Studios treated Grable's legs like national treasures. She was required to submit to weekly maintenance sessions with European body specialists. Costumes were designed to highlight her limbs, and camera angles were planned to elongate them even more. Behind the pin-up fantasy was a reality of pain, bandages, and treatments no one dared mention. To the soldiers who hung her image in their barracks, Grable was perfection. To Grable herself, those $1 million legs were often a $1 million burden. 10. Marlon Brando, the rebel who got a nose job. Marlon Brando, the storm that blew apart Hollywood's old style of acting, is remembered for raw intensity, for roles that burned with authenticity, which makes it all the more ironic that Brando's face, his most powerful tool, was surgically sculpted before he ever became a star. Early screen tests revealed something Brando hated: his nose. Broad, slightly flat, it caught the camera in ways he felt distracted from his eye. In 1949, before A Streetcar Named Desire launched him into legend, he quietly underwent a subtle rhinoplasty. It wasn't drastic. Surgeons narrowed the bridge, refined the tip, and gave him a profile that balanced his face. The difference was so subtle most audiences never questioned it. But Brando himself felt the change instantly. His confidence grew. He no longer worried about what people noticed first. They looked into his eye. The irony is staggering. The man who rejected Hollywood vanity, who mocked the system's obsession with appearances, had already played the game when it suited him. Brando's artistry was real, but his face, the one that seduced audiences in On the Waterfront and terrified them in Apocalypse Now, was touched by Hollywood steel. 9. Ava Gardner, beauty born of pain. Ava Gardner, the woman Frank Sinatra once called the most beautiful animal in the world, seemed like she was sculpted by nature itself. Her sultry looks, exotic cheekbones, and hypnotic gaze made her one of MGM's brightest stars. But in truth, Ava's beauty was literally sculpted through pain. When MGM first signed Gardner in the early 1940s, studio executives raved about her potential but nitpicked every detail of her appearance. Their verdict? Almost perfect. The flaw, they decided, was her hairline. Too low, too heavy, not the clean forehead that photographed best on screen. The solution was brutal. MGM subjected Ava to electrolysis hairline reshaping, the same agonizing process Rita Hayworth endured. Each week, for months, Ava sat through sessions where electric needles destroyed hair follicles one by one. No anesthesia, just searing pain. She often left the chair with tears in her eyes, joking bitterly that beauty in Hollywood is torture with makeup on top. And the torture didn't stop there. Subtle facial contouring procedures, early cosmetic surgeries were used to exaggerate her already prominent cheekbones. Combined with studio-mandated weight loss and strict diets, Gardner's face was literally reshaped to fit MGM's fantasy of exotic glam. On screen, the results were undeniable. Ava Gardner dazzled in films like The Killers and Mogambo. Off-screen, the scars ran deeper than the audience ever knew. Her beauty wasn't a gift, it was a sacrifice. 8. Humphrey Bogart, the lisp that Hollywood fixed, but not too much. Humphrey Bogart. The name alone conjures images of trench coats, cigarettes, and lines delivered in that unforgettable, slightly lisping drawl. But here's the twist. That voice, the one that made him iconic, was partly the result of painful surgery. In the 1930s, Bogart was struggling. He had the tough guy look, but his speech was holding him back. His natural lisp was more pronounced than audiences ever heard, and Warner Brothers feared it would kill his shot at leading man status. The solution? Dental reconstruction. Between 1935 and 1937, Bogart underwent a series of dental surgeries, extractions, reshaping, and eventually partial dentures. The idea was to correct his lift, and it worked, but not entirely. Instead of erasing it, the surgeries softened it, leaving behind the trademark cadence that became his signature. Executives initially considered the lisp a liability. Ironically, it became his strength. It gave Bogart's characters, Rick in Casablanca, Sam Spade in The Maltese Falcon, an edge, a sound no one else had. The procedures that were supposed to fix him accidentally made him unforgettable. But the price was steep. Bogart hated the pain and discomfort of his prosthetic teeth. He chain-smoked to calm his nerves, which worsened his breath and damaged his mouth further. By the 1950s, when he filmed The African Queen, co-star Katharine Hepburn privately joked that their boat wasn't the only thing that reeked. Bogart's dental work made him a star. His addictions, layered on top, made him a legend, and eventually a tragedy.
7. Sophia Loren, natural beauty with a little help to the world. Sophia Loren embodied Mediterranean perfection. Her almond eyes, sculpted cheekbones, and sensual curves made her Italy's greatest export since Da Vinci. Her beauty seemed untouched, the opposite of Hollywood's artificial machine. But even Sophia's face wasn't entirely untouched by surgeons' hands. Early in her career, as she transitioned from Italian films to international stardom, producers noted something curious. Loren's beauty in person didn't always translate on camera. Cinematographers complained her eyes didn't pop as dramatically under studio lights. A subtle surgical procedure called lateral canthopexy, a tightening of the outer corners of her eyes to exaggerate their almond shape. It was delicate work, done in Rome in the early 1950s, before she exploded in films like Two Women and Houseboat. At the same time, surgeons performed minimal contouring to emphasize her already prominent cheekbones. Nothing drastic, just enough to make her face light up under the harsh scrutiny of film stock. What's fascinating about Loren's transformation is how restrained it was. Unlike Rita Hayworth or Ava Gardner, who endured torturous changes, Loren's procedures enhanced her rather than erased her. She always said, "I owe my beauty to spaghetti." The truth? She owed a little of it to a scalp. Still, the brilliance of Sophia Loren's enhancements was that no one ever suspected. Her surgeries were invisible to the naked eye, yet immortalized on screen. 6. Dean Martin. From Dino Crocetti to Hollywood's smoothest face. Before he was the king of cool,
Dean Martin was Dino Paul Crocetti, a son of Italian immigrants with a crooked smile and a nose that Hollywood thought was too ethnic. He could sing, he could charm, but look, studios wanted polish. The answer was rhinoplasty. In 1948, at the urging of Paramount executives, Dean Martin went under the knife. The procedure refined his nose, narrowing the bridge and reshaping the tip, softening the rougher edges of his profile. It wasn't just cosmetic, it was marketing. They wanted Dean Martin to look less like an ethnic crooner and more like an all-American matinee idol. Martin resisted at first. He reportedly told Jerry Lewis, "They want me to look less Italian, next they'll want me to change my name again." But Lewis, ever the pragmatist, pushed him to do it. Dino Crocetti's not selling tickets. Dean Martin will. The surgery worked. Audiences swooned. Dean Martin's handsome face, now refined, suave, camera-ready, became central to his brand. Combined with his effortless singing style, the surgery elevated him from nightclub act to movie star. Behind the cool exterior, though, Martin always knew Hollywood had reshaped him. He once admitted privately, "They fixed my nose, but I'll always be Dino." It was the perfect irony. The man who made effortless charm look natural was in fact a creation. 5. Greta Garbo sculpting mystery. Greta Garbo, the Swedish Sphinx, built an entire career on mystery. She said little, revealed less, and let her haunting beauty do the talking. But that beauty was carefully engineered. Another case of Hollywood wielding its scalpel like a paintbrush. When Garbo first arrived in Hollywood in 1925, MGM executives were intrigued by her large, expressive eyes, but unimpressed with her face. Too round, they said. The solution: facial contouring surgery and an early stomach reduction procedure. Her cheekbones were sharpened through surgical contouring, giving her face the angular shape that defined her look. At the same time, doctors performed an early version of bariatric surgery to keep her frame slender, a drastic step rarely admitted publicly, but whispered about in studio records. The result was transformative. Garbo's round-faced youth melted into the sharp, angular goddess we know from Camille and Queen Christina. Her appearance was so dramatically altered that audiences barely recognized her from her early European films. Garbo herself despised the process. She once wrote in her diary, "They cut me to make me eternal." But the truth is, without that surgical reinvention, she might have faded as just another pretty import. Instead, she became timeless. 4. Cary Grant, ageless charm at a surgical price. Cary Grant. To this day, his name is shorthand for timeless elegance. Smooth voice, impeccable suits, that dazzling jawline. He seemed immune to age, as though he stepped out of the Philadelphia Story in 19... But here's the truth. Cary Grant's agelessness was not a miracle of nature, it was the result of an early, secretive facelift. By the early 1950s, Grant was approaching his 50th birthday, a terrifying milestone for any actor whose career depended on romantic lead. The studio system tolerated women aging far less than men, but even for men, the signs of time could threaten a career. Grant, ever the perfectionist, chose preemptive action. In 1952, he quietly disappeared to Switzerland under an assumed name, Alexander Archibald, a nod to his real birth name, Archibald Leach. There, he underwent a discreet facelift, focusing on tightening his jawline and smoothing early sagging around his neck. The procedure was primitive compared to modern cosmetic surgery, with longer recovery and greater risk. When he returned weeks later, Hollywood was none the wiser. Officially, he'd been on vacation. Unofficially, his face had been tuned up just enough to maintain the illusion of eternal youth. And it worked so well that the world believed Cary Grant had discovered the fountain of youth. The irony: Grant was obsessed with hiding the truth. For a man so open about experimenting with LSD therapy later in life, he never admitted the surgery. To his fans, his handsomeness was effortless. To him, it was maintenance, a secret lift behind the mask of 3. Gary Cooper, the ears Hollywood hated. Gary Cooper was tall, handsome, and carried a natural dignity that made him the perfect American hero. But to the merciless eye of Paramount executives in the 1920s, his profile had one fatal flaw. They stuck out just a little too far, enough to distract in close-ups. In 1928, as Cooper was being groomed for stardom, the studio recommended a procedure rarely discussed at the time, otoplasty, or ear-pinning surgery. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was painful and risky. Performed by a surgeon who had honed his craft repairing the faces of war veterans, the operation repositioned Cooper's ears closer to his head, creating the smooth, heroic profile that audiences later adored in High Noon and Sergeant York. The change was subtle but transformative. Cooper's angular features, already striking, suddenly became flawless on film. No more distracting ears, just the clean, classic silhouette of Hollywood's ultimate cowboy. Few fans ever suspected, Cooper never spoke of it, and why would? The surgery was considered vanity at a time when male stars were expected to be all natural. Yet the truth is that his rugged image, so central to America's cinematic mythology, was as carefully manufactured as any starlet's. His ears were pinned back, but his legend soared forward. 2. Rita Hayworth. Burned for beauty. Rita Hayworth wasn't just beautiful, she was transcendent. The hair flip in Gilda, the smoldering stare that melted the screen, she was Hollywood's love goddess. But the price of that transformation was brutal, even barbaric. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino, Hayworth had naturally dark hair, an olive complexion, and a low, distinctly Spanish hairline. Columbia Pictures chief, Harry Cohn, saw her as talented but too ethnic for leading roles. His solution? Erase her heritage, literally. Between 1935 and 1937, Rita endured 18 months of weekly electrolysis treatments to painfully raise her hairline by more than an inch. Each session involved electric needles destroying follicles, leaving her forehead blistered and raw. No anesthesia, no just searing pain that sometimes made her faint. The procedure scarred her scalp permanently, leaving her with chronic dermatitis. Even as her fiery red hair dyed to complete her reinvention became her trademark, she suffered itching, flaking, and burning for the rest of her life. Cohn also ordered her name changed. Margarita became Rita. Cancino became Hayworth. Piece by piece, the Spanish dancer was dismantled, and the love goddess was built. The result was breathtaking. Hayworth conquered Hollywood, graced the cover of Life magazine, and became the most desired woman of World War II. But privately she lamented, "They made me into something I wasn't." Then they fell in love with. Behind the glamour was a woman who had been burned physically and emotionally for stardom. 1. Marilyn Monroe, manufactured to perfection. And now, the crown jewel of Hollywood's secret surgeries, Marilyn Monroe, the blonde bombshell who redefined sex appeal, whose face still decorates posters, perfume bottles, and fantasies worldwide. But Marilyn, the icon, was no accident. She was built. Before she was Marilyn, she was Norma Jean Mortensen, pretty but unremarkable. Her jawline was too square, her nose too broad. She was a secretary's daughter, not a goddess. But in 1950, her talent agent, Johnny Hyde, saw her potential and funded a transformation. First came a chin implant, subtle but essential. It softened her square jaw into the delicate heart-shaped face we recognize instantly. Next, a rhinoplasty to refine the tip of her nose, slimming it just enough to perfect her profile. Together, these surgeries created the face that would launch a 1,000 magazine cover. And yet, surgery was only part of the reinvention. Her hair was bleached platinum. Her voice was trained into that breathy, childlike whisper. Her walk, the famous wiggle, was practiced with filed-down heels. Norma Jean was erased. Marilyn Monroe was created. The transformation worked beyond anyone's wildest imagination. Marilyn became a symbol, not a person, but privately she struggled with the knowledge that the world loved a version of her that wasn't entirely real. "I'm trying to find myself," she once confessed. Sometimes that's not easy. Her surgeries didn't just change her face, they changed history. Marilyn Monroe wasn't born, she